Splintering inward, two men drag her from her bed by the hair. Outside, the village of Mousehole burns orange against the night sky. She can hear her mother screaming somewhere behind her. She will never hear that voice again. Agnes is thrown into a longboat with 11 other women from her village. Their wrists are bound with rope, so tight her fingers go numb within minutes. The men speak a language she does not understand. One of them holds a curved blade to the throat of a girl who tries to stand. The girl is 14. She goes still. By dawn, Agnes is aboard a ship with over 60 Cornish captives. The youngest is 9. The oldest is 43. The men have been separated and chained below deck. The women are kept in a cramped hold that stinks of tar and human waste. When the English coast disappears over the horizon, one woman begins to pray aloud. A corsair silences her with the back of his hand. Agnes will spend the next 3 weeks on this ship. She will watch 4 women die from thirst and disease before they reach the African coast. She will be stripped, inspected, and sold in a market where buyers examine her teeth like livestock. She will be purchased by a merchant who speaks no English and taken to a house where she will remain for the next 22 years. She will bear children she is not permitted to keep. She will forget the sound of her own mother's voice. She will die at 41, never having seen England again. This is the story of what happened to 400 English women taken from Cornwall in the summer raids of 1625. And it is a story that England has tried very hard to forget. This is dark history. We find the stories buried beneath centuries of silence. Stories of ordinary people who vanished into a system designed to erase them completely. Subscribe and leave a like if you believe these stories deserve to be told. Because what the Barbary corsairs did to the women of Cornwall was not random violence, it was an industry. And it operated for over 300 years. The Barbary coast stretched from Morocco to Libya. Its ports operated as independent states ruled by corsair captains who owed nominal allegiance to the Ottoman Empire, but answered to no one. Algiers alone housed over 25,000 Christian captives by 1620. Sale, Tunis, and Tripoli held thousands more. These were not random pirates. They were a military-industrial complex built entirely on human trafficking, and their reach extended far beyond the Mediterranean. In 1595, a Barbary fleet appeared off the coast of Cornwall for the first time. The English had no warning. The corsairs landed at Penzance, burned the town, and took 80 captives in a single night. England was stunned. The raiders had sailed over 2,000 miles through hostile waters to reach a coastline that considered itself untouchable. It would not be the last time. Elizabeth Trenwith was 34 years old when the corsairs came to Louis in 1625. She had 3 children under the age of 10. Her husband Thomas was a fisherman who happened to be at sea that morning. When he returned that evening, his cottage was ash. His wife and all 3 children were gone. He spent the next 11 years trying to ransom them. He mortgaged his boat, his house, and borrowed from every merchant in Cornwall. He raised £120. It was not enough. Elizabeth was valued at 180. The children were sold separately before he could make contact. Thomas Trenwith died in 1636 without ever learning what happened to his family. The economics of Barbary slavery were precise. A healthy young woman between 15 and 25 fetched between 100 and 200 pounds at auction. That is roughly 30,000 pounds in modern currency. A skilled tradesman might earn 8 pounds per year. A ransom demanded triple the purchase price. The mathematics were designed to make rescue impossible for anyone except the wealthy. The corsairs who raided Cornwall in 1625 were not Moors or Turks. Their leader was a man named Murat Reis, born Jan Janzoon in the Dutch city of Haarlem. He had been a legitimate privateer before his capture and conversion to Islam. Now he commanded a fleet operating out of Sale, Morocco. Under his direction, Barbary ships reached Iceland in 1627, taking over 400 captives from a single village. Cornwall was closer and softer. The fishing villages had no walls, no cannons, no militia. They were harvested like crops. Mary Wolcott was 16 when Murat Reis's men pulled her from her father's boat in Penzance Harbor. She watched her father take a sword through the stomach when he tried to hold on to her arm. His body went into the water. Mary went into the hold. She would later describe the voyage in a letter smuggled to England through a Franciscan friar. The women were kept in darkness for 23 days. They were fed once daily. They were not permitted to speak. When one woman died on the 14th day, her body remained in the hold for 3 more days before the corsairs removed it. The English government knew the raids were coming. Merchants in the Mediterranean had reported increased Barbary activity throughout 1624. The mayor of Penzance had written to London requesting coastal defenses. His letter went unanswered. When the raids finally came, the response was silence. Parliament debated. The Navy claimed insufficient ships. Charles I was consumed by conflicts with France and Spain. The women of Cornwall were abandoned to their fate. Official English records claimed 60 taken in the 1625 raids. Parish records tell a different story. Mousehole alone lost 47 inhabitants in a single night. Penzance lost over 60. Louis, Fowey, and smaller fishing hamlets along the coast added dozens more. When later, historians compiled the full accounting from church registers, probate records, and family testimonies, the number exceeded 400. Over half were women and children. The discrepancy exists because England did not want to admit the scale of its failure. The journey from Cornwall to the Barbary coast took between 2 and 4 weeks depending on weather. Captives were kept below deck in holds designed for cargo. The space allotted per person was roughly 6 feet by 2 feet. There was no standing. There was no privacy. Waste accumulated where people lay. Fresh water was rationed to 1 cup per day. Bread was distributed every second morning. Many captives arrived at their destination already weakened by dysentery and dehydration. Agnes Pender watched the African coast appear through a gap in the deck, planking on September 8, 1625. The ship anchored at Sale, Morocco. The women were brought up into sunlight they had not seen in 22 days. Their eyes burned. Their legs could barely support them. They were hosed down with seawater and made to stand in a line while local merchants examined them. Agnes would later tell a ransomed sailor that she did not feel human in that moment. She felt like a horse at market. The Battistan was the slave market of Algiers. Sale had its own version. Buyers walked between captives, inspecting teeth, examining hands for signs of labor, asking questions through translators. Women under 25 were separated immediately. They commanded the highest prices. Their destinations were typically domestic service or the household harems of wealthy merchants. The term used was concubine. The reality was a life of permanent sexual availability, with no legal protections and no possibility of refusal. Catherine Trelawney was 21 when she entered the household of a textile merchant in Algiers. She had been a fisherman's daughter in Fowey. Now she was one of 4 women serving a man whose name she would never be permitted to speak aloud. Her duties began before dawn and ended after midnight. She cleaned, she cooked, she served. At night, she was summoned. She bore 2 children in 4 years. Both were taken from her within weeks of birth. She was not permitted to nurse them. She was not permitted to name them. She was told they were being raised as Muslims and would never know her. The legal status of a slave in Barbary society was absolute property. A master could sell, gift, or dispose of his slaves at will. The children of female slaves automatically became the property of the master, not the mother. Conversion to Islam provided certain protections, but did not guarantee freedom. A converted slave who fled was still subject to recapture. A converted slave who refused her master was still subject to punishment. The system was airtight. Mary Wolcott's letter to England described what happened to women who resisted. One captive from the Cornwall raids refused to enter her assigned household. She was beaten with rods until she complied. Another woman attempted to